My stepmother tried to destroy my dad's dream vacation, but karma hit harder than expected. My dad spent 30 years dreaming about diving the Great Barrier Reef. He kept a jar labeled Australia Fund in his workshop, feeding it spare change and birthday money. When he married Diane after Mom died, the jar disappeared into a closet. More practical priorities, she explained while renovating the kitchen he hadn't complained about. For a decade, I watched my father shrink. His shoulders hunched. His laugh grew quieter. His passions became whispers. The man who once built entire worlds in his woodshop now asked permission to buy new socks. The only time I saw his eyes light up was when National Geographic ran specials on the reef. Then came Dad's 60th birthday and his doctor's call. Stage 3 cancer. 6 months of aggressive treatment with cautiously optimistic chances. That night, I emptied my savings account and bought 3 tickets to Australia. Non-refundable. 1 for Dad, 1 for me, and 1 for Diane. Because despite everything, he loved her. "This is reckless," she hissed when I presented the tickets at his subdued birthday dinner. "We can't afford this with medical bills coming." Dad's eyes had already filled with tears. "The Great Barrier Reef," he whispered, touching the ticket like it might dissolve. "Insurance covers most treatment," I countered. "And we're going next month before it starts. I've already researched accommodations that can work with his dietary needs," I added, sliding over a folder. "And there's a hospital nearby if needed." Diane's smile tightened. "How considerate. Let me look into this further." The sabotage began immediately. First, she accidentally scheduled Dad's first treatment during our travel dates. I had to call the oncologist myself to confirm it could wait 2 weeks without risk. Then our passports mysteriously disappeared. I found them in the garage soaking in a bucket of rusty water that had leaked from a pipe. Dad wavered. "Maybe the timing isn't right." "This might be your only chance," I reminded him gently. 2 days before departure, Diane developed sudden severe back pain. She needed Dad's constant attention. The urgent care doctor found nothing wrong but suggested stress from the upcoming trip might be the cause. "You two should still go," she said magnanimously from her bed, wincing dramatically when Dad suggested canceling. At the airport, she called. Her mother had fallen. She needed to fly to Ohio immediately. Dad would need to transfer money from their joint account to cover emergency expenses. He was reaching for his phone when I grabbed his wrist. "Dad," I said quietly, "there's something you need to know." I pulled out my tablet and opened the folder labeled Proof. Inside were screenshots of her text messages with a man named Carl. "Can't wait until hubby's insurance pays out," read one. "Australia trip, perfect timing. Accident on Reef, easy to arrange." Dad's face went gray as he scrolled through dozens of messages detailing their affair, finances, and plans for his accident. I hadn't shown him when I first discovered the messages 2 weeks earlier. I needed more evidence, so I set a trap. "There's more," I whispered as airport security approached our gate. The officer nodded at me. "Miss Bennett, we're ready." Dad looked between us, confused. "What's happening?" "I contacted the FBI when I found these messages," I explained. "Insurance fraud across state lines is federal. They've been monitoring her communications." The security officer handed me a tablet. On the screen was a live feed from our house. 3 agents were at the door. Diane answered, already dressed for travel, not to Ohio but to Aruba, according to the visible luggage tag. Her suitcase waited in the hall. Carl stood behind her, his hand on her lower back. Dad watched stone-faced as they were both handcuffed. "She emptied your accounts this morning," I told him. "But the FBI froze the transfers. Everything's been recovered." His hand shook as he gripped the armrest. For a moment, I feared I'd made a mistake, that the shock on top of his diagnosis would be too much, that he'd collapse right here in the terminal. Instead, he squared his shoulders. "Is our flight still on schedule?" he asked, his voice steadier than I'd heard it in years. "Yes, but Dad, if you want to postpone—" "No." He stood up. "I've waited 30 years for this. I'm not waiting one more day." Our flight boarded in silence. Dad stared out the window for the first 6 hours. I worried I'd broken him completely. Somewhere over the Pacific, he finally spoke. "How long have you known?" "I suspected something was off when she changed your life insurance last year," I admitted. "Made herself sole beneficiary, tripled the payout. But I found the messages by accident 3 weeks ago when I borrowed her phone to call the doctor." "And you arranged all this, the FBI, the trap." "I couldn't let her hurt you," I said simply. "Not after everything." He nodded slowly, then reached for my hand. "Your mother would be proud." The words pierced me. Mom had always been the protector in our family. The one who checked for monsters under the bed and stood up to bullies at school conferences. The one who made me promise to look after Dad if anything happened to her. I'd been 17 when I made that promise, sitting beside her hospital bed. I'd failed her for 10 years, watching Diane slowly crush Dad's spirit. Not this time. She loved you so much, I whispered. She made me promise I'd take care of you. You did, he said firmly. You are. For the rest of the flight, we reminisced about Mom, about the wooden jewelry box he'd built her, about how she'd secretly fed his Australia fund whenever she had spare cash. She believed in your dreams even more than you did, I told him. That first morning in Australia, I woke to find Dad's bed empty. Panicked, I rushed to the hotel balcony. He stood at the railing, watching the sunrise over the ocean. His shoulders were straight, his posture open. For the first time in years, he looked tall. I was scared when she came into my life, he confessed without turning around. Scared of being alone, of dying like your mother. Bitter that life had cheated her. He shook his head. I gave away my power, my dreams, let her convince me I didn't deserve them. I joined him at the railing. And now? He smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes. Now I'm going to see that damn reef. After breakfast, we went straight to the dive shop. The FBI had alerted local authorities, and Carl's accomplices had been arrested the previous night. A new instructor met us, her face solemn after being briefed on the situation. I'm Sarah, she said, extending her hand. We've changed your dive plan completely. New location, new equipment, new team. Everything's been double and triple checked. She eyed Dad with professional concern. But given your health situation, I want to be transparent about the risks. Dad nodded. I've got cancer, he told her bluntly, but I've waited 30 years for this dive and I'm not leaving Australia without it. Sarah assessed him carefully, checking his paperwork and asking about medications. No one should be denied the reef, she finally said, but we'll take it slow, stay with your daughter, signal if anything feels wrong. The prep took longer than expected. Every piece of equipment was tested, every procedure explained twice. Dad absorbed it all, asking detailed questions that revealed how much research he'd done over the decades. You really know your stuff, Sarah remarked. Most tourists can barely remember which way to clear their masks. Dad smiled sheepishly. I've been practicing in the bathtub since 1991. By the time we reached the dive site, the morning clouds had burned away, leaving the water a crystalline blue. Visibility is exceptional today, Sarah noted. You picked the perfect time. As we prepared to enter the water, Dad paused. Your mother should be here, he said quietly. She is, I assured him, tapping his chest. Right here. He nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped off the boat. Underwater, Dad transformed. Each movement was graceful, precise, his eyes wide with wonder behind his mask. When a sea turtle glided past, he reached out, not to touch, just to feel the water displaced by its flippers. Through the clear water, I watched him examining coral formations, pointing excitedly at fish species I couldn't name. He moved with a certainty I hadn't seen in years, as if his body remembered how to be strong. For those 60 minutes, cancer didn't exist. Diane didn't exist. The betrayal didn't exist. There was only the reef, vibrant and alive, and my father, equally vibrant, equally alive. Back on the boat, he couldn't stop talking. Sarah laughed as he described each fish, each coral formation with childlike excitement. Most newcomers don't notice half those details, she said. You've got a diver's eye. Dad beamed. I've been studying this place since I was 20. Well, if you're up for it, there's a night dive tomorrow. Different creatures entirely. The bioluminescence this time of year is spectacular. Dad looked at me, a question in his eyes. I nodded. If you feel up to it. I've never felt better, he said, and I was surprised to realize it might be true. His cheeks were flushed with healthy color, his breathing steady. The man who'd shuffled through the airport yesterday now stood tall, gesturing animatedly as he described a clownfish he'd spotted. At dinner that night, Dad pulled out a small notebook and began sketching the fish he'd seen. His hand moved with certainty across the page. I realized I hadn't seen him draw anything in years. Tomorrow, we should visit that marine biology center, he said between bites of grilled barramundi. And I want to try that advanced dive site Sarah mentioned. He paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. What? Why are you looking at me like that? It's just good to have you back, I said, blinking back tears. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, my FBI agent friend. Both in custody, Diane talking. Carl had history of insurance scams with previous girlfriends. Your father's life insurance has been reinstated with you as beneficiary per his original instructions. Also, swept the house and found hidden cameras in your bedroom and bathroom from your last visit. This lady is a piece of work. I showed Dad the message. He nodded grimly. I trusted her with everything, he said quietly. My home, my finances, my heart. I know, I whispered, but I won't let her take this too, he continued, gesturing around us. This moment, this place. He insisted on paying for dinner, something Diane had never allowed. She's controlled the money for 10 years, he explained, handing over his credit card with a flourish. It's time I remembered how to sign my own name. Back at the hotel, Dad received an email from his oncologist who had been briefed on the situation. She had reviewed his latest scans in more detail, and the news was cautiously better. The cancer was still at stage 3, but a new immunotherapy treatment had shown promising results for his specific mutation. He was a perfect candidate for the clinical trial starting next month. It's not a cure, he explained, reading the details aloud, but it could mean years instead of months. That's amazing, I said, relief washing through me. You could have time to really explore Australia. His eyes lit up. I could, couldn't I? The next morning, Dad seemed lighter. We spent the day exploring tide pools, talking to marine biologists, and planning the next day's dive. Not once did he mention Diane or the cancer. Just before sunset, we sat on the beach. Dad carefully removed his wedding ring and held it up to the fading light. I've been holding on to things too tightly, he mused. Fear does that, makes you grip what you have instead of reaching for what you want. With a sudden flick of his wrist, he sent the ring sailing into the ocean. What are you doing? I gasped. That was platinum. Dad laughed. Consider it my contribution to the reef ecosystem. Some lucky crab is about to have a very fancy home. As darkness fell, we met Sarah for the night dive. Dad was practically bouncing with excitement as they ran through the safety briefing. Special lights were distributed, designed to reveal the fluorescence of certain coral species. It's like entering another world, Sarah explained. Everything you saw today will look completely different. Dad nodded eagerly. I've seen the photos, but they say it doesn't compare to experiencing it firsthand. When we submerged, I understood what they meant. The reef had transformed. Corals that had appeared brown during the day now glowed with otherworldly blues and greens. Fish darted through the darkness like living neon signs. Instead of staying cautiously at my side, Dad explored with growing confidence, pointing out creatures that only emerged at night. At one point, he found a small octopus changing colors as it hunted. He hovered perfectly still, watching its dance of camouflage for nearly 10 minutes. He emerged from the water buzzing with adrenaline, describing bioluminescent creatures and nocturnal predators with reverent awe. Did you see that octopus? He demanded, gesturing wildly. The way it communicated with color, that's what Mom and I used to watch on those documentaries during her treatments. She always said the way they changed was like magic. Sarah pulled me aside afterward. Your father's a natural. Has he really never dived before? I shook my head. He's been waiting his whole life for this. She smiled. Well, he moves like he belongs here, and I've never seen anyone so aware of their surroundings on their first night dive. Most people miss everything because they're too focused on not losing their buddy. Over dinner, Dad couldn't stop talking about the octopus. It's incredible how something can completely transform itself, he mused. One moment it's visible, the next it's perfectly camouflaged, but it's still itself underneath. I realized he was talking about more than just the octopus. You've been changing colors too, I observed, going back to who you were before. He considered this. Not exactly, I'm not the same person I was 30 years ago. He paused. Maybe I'm becoming who I was always meant to be if fear hadn't gotten in the way. Back at the hotel, Dad called his bank and began the process of securing his accounts. One by one, he removed Diane's access to his funds, his credit cards, his safe deposit box. His voice grew stronger with each call. I'd like to report fraudulent activity, he said, spine straight. And I need to change all my security questions and passwords. While he worked, I checked my emails. Jessica had sent video footage from Diane's interrogation. I watched with a mixture of vindication and horror as she coldly described how she targeted my father. He was perfect, she told the investigators. Emotionally vulnerable, financially stable, and isolated from family. I've never seen someone so easy to manipulate. When asked about the murder plot, she didn't even try to deny it. It was Carl's idea to use the diving accident. I wanted something that looked like natural causes, heart attack, medication interaction, but he said drowning was cleaner. I deleted the email without showing Dad. Some things were better left unseen. The next morning, he was up before dawn again. This time, I found him swimming laps in the hotel pool. Doctor said I need to build my strength for treatment, he explained between strokes, and I want to be stronger for tomorrow's dive. Each day that week followed a similar pattern. Dad would wake early, exercise, then insist on trying a new dive site. By the fourth day, Sarah pronounced him ready for a slightly more challenging location. "There's a drift dive I think you'll love," she told him. "Stronger currents, but much more diverse marine life. The kind of place most tourists never see." Dad didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." The drift dive was magical. The current carried us effortlessly along a wall of coral that seemed to stretch infinitely into the blue depths. Schools of fish moved around us like living silver curtains. Dad spotted a reef shark gliding gracefully below us and gave me an enthusiastic thumbs up. Back on the boat, Sarah introduced us to a marine biologist who happened to be on board. "Dr. Lung, these are the Bennetts. Robert here has an incredible eye for marine species identification." The biologist's eyebrows rose. "Oh, are you in the field?" Dad laughed. "Just a hobbyist. 30 years of reading National Geographic." Dr. Lung smiled. "Sometimes the amateurs notice what the professionals miss. We get too focused on our specific research." She explained that she was documenting the effects of climate change on the reef ecosystem. "We're losing coral at an alarming rate, but there are also surprising adaptation stories that give us hope." Dad leaned forward, asking questions about thermal tolerance in coral species and migration patterns of reef fish. The conversation continued through lunch, with Dr. Lung eventually inviting us to visit her research station the following day. "We're always looking for volunteers," she mentioned. "Even short-term help with data recording is valuable." Dad's eyes lit up. "I'd love to help." The research station was a cluster of weathered buildings on a small island. Graduate students bustled about carrying equipment and arguing good-naturedly about methodology. Dr. Lung showed us the labs where coral samples were analyzed, the tanks where restoration experiments took place, and the computer room where data was processed. "This is where the real work happens," she explained. "Diving is beautiful, but the science happens here in the spreadsheets and statistical models." Dad surprised me by sitting down at one of the computers and offering to help enter the previous day's survey data. His decades of accounting work made him methodical and precise, exactly what was needed. "You're quite good at this," Dr. Lung observed after checking his work. "Have you considered volunteering remotely? We always need help with data processing." Dad looked up, intrigued. "That's possible?" "Absolutely. Much of our work can be done anywhere with an internet connection. Our oldest remote volunteer is 82, working from her nursing home in Scotland." On the boat ride back, Dad was quiet, thoughtful. "What's on your mind?" I asked. "Just thinking about possibilities," he replied. Over the next few days, Dad completed 6 more dives. He filled his notebook with sketches and observations. He spoke to every marine biologist who would give him time. He even befriended a documentary crew filming coral restoration and convinced them to let him volunteer as an extra set of hands. "They say I'm good at spotting juvenile crown of thorns starfish," he told me proudly one evening. Crown of thorns were invasive predators destroying parts of the reef. Apparently, most volunteers miss the tiny ones. On our last day, I found him speaking intently with Sarah and the dive shop owner. They shook hands, and Dad walked back to me looking slightly dazed. "What was that about?" I asked. "I just got a job," he said, sounding surprised himself. "Starting in 3 months after my first round of treatment, part-time dive guide for beginners and older tourists. They need someone patient who understands physical limitations." "You're moving to Australia?" He shrugged. "Why not? The immunotherapy trial has a satellite location in Brisbane, and I've spent too long not living where I belong." The idea was simultaneously shocking and perfectly logical. Dad had no reason to return home except to sell the house and deal with the legal aftermath of Diane's arrest. His job had been eliminated in a corporate restructuring 2 years ago, something Diane had kept secret for months, pretending he was still working while she controlled the severance payments. "What about your friends, your life back home?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Diane had systematically isolated him over the years. "My life hasn't been mine for a decade," he said simply. "It's time I built a new one. That night, I helped him research apartments in Cairns, the gateway city to the Great Barrier Reef. We found a modest one-bedroom within walking distance of the marina. It's perfect, he decided. Simple, affordable, and close to the water. On the flight home, Dad sketched plans for custom dive equipment modifications. For people with limited mobility, he explained, there's a whole market of people like me, older, maybe not in perfect health, but still dreaming of seeing the reef. He showed me designs for buoyancy compensators that would be easier to manage with arthritic hands and simplified weight systems that wouldn't strain the back. Sarah says if they work, the shop might develop them commercially. I could consult. His diagnosis hadn't changed. His bank accounts were still recovering. His marriage had imploded in the most public, humiliating way possible. But something fundamental had shifted. The man sitting beside me on the plane was not the same one who had left home 2 weeks ago. He spoke with authority, made decisions without hesitation, even held eye contact in a way he hadn't in years. When we landed, Jessica met us at the airport. "How much trouble is she in?" Dad asked after greetings were exchanged. "Substantial," Jessica replied. "Conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, identity theft, and they found evidence linking her to a suspicious death 3 years ago. Her previous husband." Dad's eyes widened. "She was married before?" Jessica nodded grimly. 3 times, each husband older, each ending with her significantly wealthier. The third died in what was ruled an accidental drowning. We're reopening the investigation. On the drive home, Dad was quiet, processing. "You okay?" I asked. "Just thinking about how easy it is to fall into someone's trap when you're desperate not to be alone." At the house, crime scene tapes still cross the front door. "They've cleared most of the rooms," Jessica explained, "but they're still gathering evidence from her office. You can collect personal items, but nothing can be removed from her spaces yet." Dad walked through the house like a tourist in a museum, detached and mildly curious. He passed the renovated kitchen without a glance. The living room, with its uncomfortable designer furniture, earned barely a shrug. But when he reached his old workshop, now a sterile home gym that showed no signs of use, he paused. "I want to turn it back," he said. "Before I sell, I want to build something here one more time." That night, he slept in the guest room, refusing to enter the master bedroom he'd shared with Diane. In the morning, he called a realtor. "I need to sell quickly," he explained. "I'm moving abroad for medical treatments." Over the next 2 weeks, Dad transformed. He worked with methodical focus, dismantling the gym equipment and reinstalling his old workbenches. The house filled with the scent of sawdust for the first time in a decade. He built 3 pieces, a jewelry box similar to the one he'd made for my mother, a small writing desk, and an intricate model of a coral reef. Each morning he worked, pausing only for the appointments with his oncologist, who confirmed he was an excellent candidate for the immunotherapy trial. "The Australian trial site has already been contacted," the doctor assured him. "They're prepared to continue your treatment protocol exactly as we'll be starting it." 2 months after our return, I helped Dad pack his modest apartment. He'd sold the house, dividing the proceeds with Diane's legal fees taken out. He didn't care. "Just things," he said, discarding furniture and mementos without sentimentality. He kept his tools, his books, and a single photo of Mom. Everything else he either sold or gave away. The day before his flight back to Australia, we received news. Diane had taken a plea deal, testifying against Carl, who had apparently done this 3 times before with other women's husbands. She would serve 5 years. Carl faced 20. Dad didn't react, just continued packing his dive notebooks. "Does it bother you?" I finally asked. "That she'll be out someday? That she almost killed me?" He looked up, surprisingly calm. "Every day we almost die, cars almost hit us, arteries almost block, the earth beneath our feet almost shifts." He closed the box carefully. "The miracle isn't that she almost succeeded, it's that she almost stole my joy before she stole my life." I helped him carry the boxes to Jessica's car. She'd volunteered to drive us to the airport. "I'll email everything as the case progresses," she promised. "But honestly, Robert, you might be happier not knowing." Dad nodded. "The past is the past. I'm more interested in the future now." At the airport, I hugged him tightly. "Promise you'll take care of yourself. Follow the treatment protocol." "I promise," he said. Then he held me at arm's length. "But understand this. Whether I have 5 months or 50 years, I'm going to live them diving that reef." I smiled through tears. "Deal." He handed me a small package. "Open this after my plane takes off." I waited until his flight was announced, hugged him one more time, then watched as he walked confidently through security. No hesitation, no looking back. When his plane was safely in the air, I unwrapped the package. Inside was the jewelry box he'd built. It contained a set of keys and a deed to a small piece of land near my apartment. A note explained, "This was going to be a workshop for me near you. Now it should be whatever you dream of. Don't wait 30 years like I did." 6 months later, I flew to Australia. The small land parcel had become a modest pottery studio, something I'd always wanted to explore but never had. Throwing clay centered me in a way nothing else had since losing Mom. Dad met me at the airport and I barely recognized him. His hair had grown out from the thinning corporate cut Diane had insisted upon, now thick and silver. His skin was tanned, his frame stronger than it had been in years. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in their own body. "The treatments are working," he explained as we drove to his apartment. "Not a cure, but the tumors have shrunk significantly. Doctor says we've bought years, maybe a decade." His apartment was simple but personal in a way the old house never had been. Underwater photographs he'd taken covered the walls. His coffee table displayed specimens he'd collected with proper permits. Marine biology textbooks filled the bookshelf. "I've been taking classes at the local university," he said when he caught me examining them. "Just auditing for now, but they've offered to admit me formally next term. Apparently being enthusiastic counts for a lot, even without a science background." "That's amazing, Dad. I have something to show you," he said, leading me down to the beach where a group of people had gathered around a small boat. "What's this?" "My dive charter," he said proudly. "Specialized tours for cancer patients and survivors. We just got approved for insurance last week." I stared in disbelief. "You started a business in 6 months?" He shrugged. "Turns out the connections I made during our first trip were valuable. Dr. Lung introduced me to a cancer support organization. Sarah helped with the dive certifications and equipment modifications. It all came together faster than I expected." The boat's name caught my eye, freshly painted on the stern, Karma's Current. Dad followed my gaze and grinned. Fitting, isn't it? He'd named his second chance after the force that had given it to him. The small group waiting by the boat turned out to be his first official clients. 3 women and 2 men, all cancer patients or survivors. Dad introduced me proudly. "This is my daughter, the one who saved my life by bringing me here." A woman with a colorful headscarf covering her chemo-bare scalp hugged me impulsively. "Your father has been our inspiration. If he can do this at his age with his diagnosis," she gestured to the others, "it gives us all hope." I watched as Dad helped them aboard, explaining equipment with patient expertise. Each person received individualized attention. A buoyancy compensator adjusted for a woman with limited arm mobility from surgery, a mask specially treated to prevent fogging for a man on oxygen. "We'll go nice and slow," he assured them. "The reef isn't going anywhere. We have all the time we need." The confidence in his voice made it sound true. Even though some of them clearly had advanced disease, he was giving them something precious. A day where cancer wasn't the main character in their story. That evening, as we sat watching the sunset from his balcony, Dad handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for the exact amount I'd spent on those original plane tickets. "I can't take this," I protested. "I didn't do it for repayment." "It's not repayment," he said firmly. "It's an investment in your dreams, whatever they are." I thought about the pottery studio, the unfinished business plan on my laptop, the concept for therapeutic ceramics classes I'd been too afraid to launch. "The thing about karma," Dad said, watching the horizon where the sun melted into the sea, "is that it doesn't just punish the wicked, it rewards the brave." He tapped the check. "Your courage saved my life twice. Once from Diane, and once by showing me I still had something to live for." I folded the check carefully and put it in my wallet. Dad smiled. "Tell me about this business idea of yours, the one you think is too risky." As the stars appeared, I told him everything. My fears, my hopes, my detailed plans. He listened with the same rapt attention he gave to the reef's creatures. When I finished, he nodded once. "Sounds like you need to take the dive." The next morning, we went out on his boat. The clients were meeting us at a different location later, so we had the vessel to ourselves. I'd done a few beginner dives with him during my visit, but never anything challenging. Today's sight was different, deeper, with stronger currents. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," I admitted as we prepared our gear. Dad adjusted my tank with practiced hands. "That's the secret no one tells you," he said. "No one's ever ready, you just jump anyway." We stood at the edge of the boat, masks on, regulators in. "On 3, he said, his voice muffled but clear. 1, 2. He grabbed my hand and pulled me in on 2. The shock of the plunge, the disorientation, the moment of panic, and then clarity. The underwater world opened up beneath us, vast and beautiful and terrifying. Dad gave me the okay signal, his eyes crinkling behind his mask. I signaled back, and together we descended into the blue. The current was stronger than any I'd experienced, pulling us along the reef wall. At first I fought it, trying to maintain perfect position. Dad tapped my arm and shook his head. He demonstrated a more relaxed posture, letting the water move him while maintaining just enough control to steer. I copied him, and suddenly everything was easier. We drifted past coral formations more intricate than any I'd seen. Fish darted around us, unbothered by our presence. A moray eel watched suspiciously from its crevice. A sea turtle cruised above, perfectly adapted to the current. Dad pointed to our right. In the distance, barely visible in the blue haze, a small pod of dolphins passed. Their clicks and whistles reached us faintly through the water. For a moment, watching him floating effortlessly in this alien world, I forgot that my father was sick. Forgot that he'd been betrayed and nearly murdered. Forgot everything except the simple miracle of his joy. When we surfaced an hour later, he was beaming. "That's the dive I dreamed about for 30 years, he said as we pulled ourselves back aboard. "Not the tourist sites, the real reef, wild and unpredictable and alive." I helped him remove his tank. "I can see why you love it. It's not just the reef," he said, suddenly serious. "It's what it represents, a world that exists whether we see it or not, thriving in its own way, on its own terms. When I'm down there, I'm just a visitor in something ancient and indifferent to my presence." He began stowing our gear with practiced efficiency. That's what Diane never understood. Dreams aren't frivolous. They're windows into other possible worlds, other possible selves. She wanted to keep me small, contained, controllable. But down there, he gestured to the water, I'm part of something enormous, and that makes me bigger, not smaller. We picked up his clients at the marina. For the rest of the day, I watched my father guide them through their first reef experience. He was patient with their fears, celebrated their small victories, anticipated problems before they arose. With each person, he shared some small piece of knowledge, the name of a particular fish, the age of a coral formation, the relationship between species. His passion was contagious, his expertise evident. "Your father is a natural teacher," observed one client, a former principal now battling lymphoma. "He should have been doing this his whole life." "He's doing it now," I replied. "That's what matters." That night, Dad's phone rang during dinner. It was Dr. Lung from the research station. "They've approved our grant application," he announced after the call. "Full funding for the citizen science program. I'll be coordinating the volunteer data collection." His eyes shone with excitement. "We'll be training cancer patients and survivors to assist with basic reef monitoring. The therapeutic effects of water-based activity combined with meaningful scientific contribution. It's a perfect intersection." I realized that in 6 short months, my father had created a life more purposeful and authentic than the one he'd spent decades building back home. Here, his illness wasn't a death sentence, but a qualification, his age an asset rather than a liability. "Mom would be amazed," I said. He nodded. "She always saw possibilities I couldn't. Remember how she'd rearrange a room and suddenly it would feel completely different? Same furniture, different perspective?" "That's exactly what you've done with your life," I observed, "rearrange the pieces you already had." After dinner, we walked along the beach. The moon cast a silver path across the water, mimicking the one his boat would take to the reef in the morning. "I've been thinking about Diane," Dad said unexpectedly. I tensed. "What about her?" I was angry at first, furious that she'd tried to kill me, of course, but also that she'd stolen a decade of my life, made me doubt my own worth, convinced me that safety was more important than joy. He picked up a shell, examined it, and tossed it back to the water. "But now I'm almost grateful." "Grateful? Dad, she was going to murder you." He smiled. "Riley, yes. And because of that, you bought those tickets. We came here. I found this life." He gestured around us. Without her betrayal, I might have spent my final years regretfully watching reef documentaries from my recliner, still talking about someday. I considered this. So what you're saying is even the worst actions can lead to unexpected gifts? Her cruelty broke me out of a prison I'd helped build. Without meaning to, she set me free. As we turned back toward his apartment, something caught my eye further down the beach. A young family was releasing paper lanterns, the glowing orbs rising slowly into the night sky. "Dad, look," I whispered. He watched the lanterns ascend, their light reflecting in his eyes. "Your mother and I did that once in Japan. We wrote our biggest dreams on the lanterns before releasing them." "What did yours say?" I asked. "To dive the Great Barrier Reef," he replied without hesitation. "And to grow old with her." "At least you got one of those." He put his arm around my shoulders. "And discovered how many more dreams were waiting to be dreamed." The lanterns drifted higher until they were indistinguishable from the stars. The day I left to return home, Dad drove me to the airport. His boat was booked for the afternoon, another group of cancer patients eager to experience the reef. "What will you do with the money?" he asked, nodding toward my purse where the check resided. "Expand the studio," I decided. "Hire an assistant. Start the therapeutic classes for trauma survivors we talked about." He smiled. "Sounds perfect." At the security checkpoint, I hugged him tightly. "I'll be back in 3 months. Sooner if you need me." "I'll be fine," he assured me. "Better than fine, but visit anyway." I watched him walk away, straight-backed and purposeful. Not the diminished man Diane had crafted, but someone new, or perhaps someone rediscovered. 6 months later, I received a package from Australia. Inside was a carved wooden plaque for my studio and a note, the first piece from my new workshop. "Just finished the house renovations. The doctors are amazed by my progress. Remission isn't impossible, they're saying now. I'm taking a full course load at university next term. Life is too short for anything less than wonder. My boat takes out 3 groups a week now. Last Thursday we had a woman who was given 2 months to live 5 years ago. She wants to become a dive instructor. That's the thing about karma and currents and life. You never know where they'll take you until you're brave enough to dive in. Love, Dad." P.S. Look what Sarah found while diving yesterday. Beneath the note was a small plastic bag containing his platinum wedding ring, now encrusted with tiny barnacles and sea growth. It had transformed from a symbol of captivity into a perfectly self-contained ecosystem, just like its former owner.